World War II was the deadliest conflict in human history, which took place over 6 brutal years of death and destruction, which ended in 1945 after the United States of America dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japan, devastating both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Though this event effectively brought the war to an end, it also came at a great price, for the Pandora's box of the nuclear threat would now become humanity's burden to bear. This fact became evident when our first brush with nuclear Armageddon took place some 17 years later in the form of the Cuban Missile Crisis. After the failed Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba, the now nuclear-armed Soviet Union, under the leadership of Nikita Khrushchev, reached a secret agreement with Cuban Premier Fidel Castro to place Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba to deter any future invasion attempt. Later that year, a US U-2 aircraft took several pictures clearly showing the nuclear missile launch sites. The American president, John F. Kennedy, sent a letter to the Russian President Nikita Khrushchev declaring that the United States would not permit offensive weapons to be delivered to Cuba, and demanded that the Soviets dismantle the missile bases. Kennedy then informed the public that it shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. Khrushchev responded to Kennedy that he would not comply. The world held its breath, poised on the edge of nuclear Armageddon for the next 4 days as the US prepared a military strike on Cuba to destroy the Russian missiles. As tensions reached boiling point, a diplomatic agreement was negotiated between Kennedy and Khrushchev, and disaster was averted. And this remains as the most famous incident where a nuclear holocaust was almost a reality. But what most people are not aware of is that in 1983, during President Ronald Reagan's first term, the world once again came close to nuclear Armageddon, because this time the crisis played out largely out of public view. Due to Soviet intelligence gathering, a conclusion had been reached that the US was at this point likely planning a nuclear strike against the Soviet Union. The development of the new Pershing II nuclear-armed ballistic missile and the Star Wars program, to them, seemed to validate this. The Soviets were on high alert when on September 1, 1983, Korean Airlines Flight 07 accidentally violated Soviet airspace and flew over a Soviet nuclear submarine base. A Soviet air defense Su-15 fighter intercepted and shot down the Korean Airlines 747 near Sakhalin Island, killing all 269 people on board, including 62 Americans. On September 3, 1983, a U.S. Navy EP-3 intelligence aircraft was near the KAL-07 crash site when the Soviets wrongly determined the Navy plane had violated Russian airspace. 2 MiG-23 fighters were ordered to shoot down the U.S. aircraft. 4 U.S. F-15s were scrambled to engage the MiGs. The EP-3 pilot dove for the wave tops to evade the Russian fighters and, after a tense period, the EP-3 reached Japanese airspace, safe from Soviet attack. The F-15s were ordered by command to disengage, thus avoiding a potentially disastrous series of events. When the commander was later questioned on his decision to disengage the MiGs, he responded, "I don't think I'll start World War III this afternoon." Several weeks later, with tensions high between the superpowers, yet another incident took place. Tensions remained high as the U.S. labeled the shootdown of KAL-07 a massacre and a crime against humanity, when several weeks later, the USSR's National Missile Defense Center received a warning from their satellite detection system that the United States had launched intercontinental ballistic missiles from Grand Forks Air Force Base, an occurrence that, if true, would require the activation of procedures for a retaliatory attack. By sheer coincidence, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov, who was also a signal engineer, was subbing for a sick comrade that night and assessed, using his technical expertise, that the signals were possibly in error, which turned out to be correct. It was later discovered that light reflections from high clouds had incorrectly been interpreted by satellite sensors to be ICBM missile launches. Had the Kremlin ignored Petrov and instead acted on the phantom American ICBM attack, the world would have been plunged into global nuclear war. These incidents serve as a reminder of the inherent dangers in the terrible power we possess. We have been fortunate in the past. Let's hope that luck continues.